Good morning, everyone. This is JM and Josh, and this is episode three of of the Grand Campaign. I know what I'm doing. I've had enough coffee. Of the Grand Campaign. We'll be doing a part two later today with Richard. Had a couple of scheduling things, but we're just going to dive into our topic for today. But before we do that, Josh, how are you doing? How's the Gebercan game going?
I am exhausted. I got very little sleep, so I will probably be yawning through half of this, but I promise it's not because I'm disinterested. uh, the campaign is it's a bit of a mess. I don't remember what was happening the last time we did this, but uh, party parties part of a caravan trying to find new resource streams for their city. They go into this new an uncharted valley to look for timber and stone. That's what the caravan's doing. The party is getting into all kinds of trouble. I don't remember what had happened the last time, but
I
as of
think the paladin
now,
of the common people ended up defending a noble's right to
okay,
kill someone.
okay, yes, is essentially, yeah, right. Basically used her magical ability, right, her faith to cover up uh, a not an indiscretion. That's a euphemism for, yeah, another noble having killed a bunch of commoners in self-defense, but the picture was bad. So yeah, basically used that to protect a noble against the knowledge and interests of the commoners. So yeah, that was bad. Um, so what has happened since then is the party, they had gone up into the mountains and found this knoll camp, and the knolls had been attacking the caravan every night, and so they decided to put a stop to it. So they kind of tracked them back to the largest knoll village, um, and killed most of the things there. Um, well, most of the knolls, um, and had to retreat eventually. It was a messy fight,
Hmm.
but they killed most of them and then eventually had to retreat, and the gnolls didn't come down. But over the course of the fight, one of them had some kind of mind reading ability up, one of the party that is, and they could tell that the matriarch of the gnoll camp really needed this battle to end, really just needed this conflict to be over, and it was really confusing. There was something more important on the matriarch's
Right.
mind. And they were curious about that, but they didn't end up sticking around to figure it out. One of them tried to negotiate with the Knoll. Didn't the Knoll basically said, "Fine, like give me the bodies of your two downed members right now in payment for my like tribesmen lost." And the party was like, "No, no, we can't do that. We can't do that." So it didn't end up going anywhere. But the Knolls didn't come that night, and everybody in camp was really excited. They had all of the when the caravanners came back to camp, they had all kinds of like animals and beasts and things that had just kind of like run into their camp, and they had just captured them. It was a day of tremendous bounty. Just over the course of the day, lots of exotic creatures had basically just run into camp, and they killed the adults, and then all of the children they put in, like all of the younger ones they put into cages. And so like the caravans come back with all of their timber and their stone, but
Right.
they also have kobolds and trolls and ogres and just
Oh wow.
hundreds of creatures in cages on the caravans, right? Chained with the group. This is all fantastic slave labor. All of the capture of those things goes to, right, the individual. Those are not That's not caravan pay. That's if you caught it and you
Right.
can keep it. Like, you get to sell that when you get back to
It's a
the city.
bounty.
Oh yeah. So everybody, the whole encampment is just partying and excited. This was what an incredible day, and the party was trying to figure out what had happened. And the druid talked with a bunch of the creatures and found out, basically it's in its home or its tunnels or wherever it lives, everything suddenly went dark, even though, right, there's a kobold talking, even though the torches didn't go out.
Right.
Like, the torches were still burning, but all light was extinguished, and they just ran. They don't know what had happened. They just ran. And the druid I forgot, the druid had been having dreams about a shadow from the mountain blotting out the stars.
Oh,
And
that's
so,
not
and
good.
yeah, that's a little bit of foreshadowing that's kind of needed there. So she had been having that dream, and now she's hearing that from these creatures. um, and so they told the caravanners to pack up and be ready to run. The party didn't know what was going to happen. They were just like, hey, everybody, just have your kits nearby. Just be ready. Failed horribly on the roll, and so, like, a few people listened, but everybody else is too flush with, the excitement of the day.
Enjoy. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. uh, the encampment gets attacked that night by thousands of knoll-shaped shadows, and shadows of just every other shape. Right? There's bears, there's gnolls, there's ogres, there's kobolds, there's everything, but they're all just wreathed in shadow. And what they found out is that when you do enough damage to one, the shadow disperses, and that
Mm,
creature is laying on the ground, bleeding out from prior wounds, not the wounds that you just delivered to it.
okay.
Um, it's a hard fight, and they lost.
Oh
I was
no.
using the strongholds and followers mass combat rules, and so,
Right.
like, they've got their squad. There's three sections of the wall. The party is defending one of them, and then, right, so there's like three big massive creatures, a bunch of gnolls. The map was insane. I should have. I actually, I think I have it posted in one of the recaps or something. It was horrific. It was a 2-session battle.
Oh
Um,
wow.
and they lost. That So what they lost, as in, all their armies were dispersed
Mm-hmm.
and destroyed, and so they are fleeing through the mountains with, like, 5 or 6 caravanners that actually listened and had their kits nearby. But I ran it as a skill challenge, and they end up, the they're fleeing through the mountains, and the druid finds out that rolls a nat 20, like, trying to talk to, like, the landscape, and finds out that there is just like a ring of shadow extending in the entire region, spreading outwards, and it is only safe, like, you could try to outrun it and just book it off into the wilderness, but the wilderness in the world is, you don't do that. um, or you try to push through it and get to the center where it appears to have originated and is no longer there. And there's an immense psychic pressure on that spot that seems to be, like, dispelling it. And so the party, like, just books it off into the mountains and winds up right back at that camp, where there's some kind of summit happening between a lich, a hag, a giant, and some guy in, like, tattered clothing and barefoot. And they're all just standing in the middle of this
Oh man.
giant rune that's been carved into the ground, talking. And the party only knew a couple of the languages, so they got about a third of the conversation. Um, but they gathered that something really bad was happening. These things were negotiating something, and it failed. The negotiations fell apart. Whatever they were trying to do failed, and then they all just kind of teleport out of there. and they're really confused. And then a giant walks out of the shadows, scrapes the rune off the ground, turns into a rock, and flies away. ROC, not the
I was like,
stone.
ooh.
Turns into a rock and flies away. Totally confused. They find that there's a door inside the Knoll cave. It has some connection to the orc echoes, so the orc druid in the party is really interested and confused. Couldn't figure out too much about it, so then they just kind of had to journey through the wilderness. Um, and we last ended. They ran into an allied echo of her her tribe, and you're going to be very proud of me, Jam. I I tried to convince. These are nomadic tribes. Food
Mhm.
resources very important. One of the players can 5 times a day cast create food and water with no resource expenditure, um, and he just kind of did that in front of the orcs. And one of the leaders of the Echo tried to buy him from the druid character. It's like, hey, like we will send your Echo 12 like fertile females. Like they've had children before, they were all strong and healthy. We'll send them off to your tribe.
But you leave the guy who can create food and water
Yeah,
here.
exactly. And she seriously considered it, um, ended up not doing it. We went up to 20, still didn't do it. So then before the party left, that same leader went to that player character and said, hey, we will give you mating rights with 12 of our healthy child bearers if you'll stay with us for a season. And he took it.
Yep, that sounds well.
I was so happy. I need DM achievements. Like I need Steam achievements for being a dungeon master because one of them would definitely be successfully bribe a member of the party into abandoning the party.
Yeah, we
He,
should.
he didn't abandon them. What he ended up doing is he negotiated down and acquired a war band to escort the party safely back to the city.
Yeah, we
So
should put together DM achievements. I think that would be like, and just make them available to the patrons. JD, if you are watching this, add this to my task list.
yeah. So we ended with them being delivered about 10 miles outside the nearest city. Um, so their caravan is annihilated. Um, the party is down one person who, I don't know if he sacrificed himself or he just like went off to his destiny.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know which one I would qualify that as. As
Yeah.
as the party was leaving, they were watching the 8 selected orcs, basically establishing a pecking order. It was so they're not sure whether they left that character to
In good
a.
hands or in bad hands.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. So I was very proud of that. Uh,
Awesome. I love hearing the recap of Gebergan. It is delightfully dark and very well grounded in sort of an old world feel, and I love that.
Good if that's what you're getting from the recaps.
Is, is that a good
Okay,
thing? Am I getting the wrong thing?
it's a very good thing.
Well, let's jump into our topic for today on the Grand Campaign. Now, we've covered what a Grand Campaign is. Obviously, Josh has characters retiring and new characters stepping in, so I would argue that Josh is running his game as a Grand Campaign. There are multiple characters, multiple groups, multiple play styles that are going on. And actually, we're going to put a link in the show notes to Questing Beast. Ben over at Questing Beast had a really great um, video on AD&D and Gary's sort of default assumption. Hey, Rook, good to see you this morning. And as always, thank you so much for your generosity. It's always good to see you regardless, but I always like to call out your generosity when when I see it. And Ben at Questing Beast talked about how the original model in the AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide is that multiple characters per player, multiple parties per group, go out and do the adventure that you have the people for, essentially. This is kind of how we ran. I've talked a little bit about the Big Rifts campaign that I played back in the day. And that's literally how it was. Who brought what characters? What adventures do we have to go on that are still lying about? Adventures did the GMs prepare? And, that's how we played a weekend. We'd run 5 or 6 adventures with 4 or 5 different groups. And, your individual characters would get XP, and you would go you'd come back the next weekend with maybe new characters, different characters. Oh, hey, no, I definitely want to go back and finish this thing that the high level group was doing. Do we have a consensus? Do we have enough people there? So the reason I'm bringing all of that up is system matters. When you're planning a grand campaign, actually when you're planning any campaign, I personally think system uh, definitely matters. Now there are some people who would argue this point, and I'm looking at like Powered by the Apocalypse, or Fate, or some could argue 5e at this point, right? That you can take one system and hammer it into whatever shape you need it to be. We're seeing a Dark Souls. I got in. My buddy Ben got in. Josh, the Hellboy 5th edition role playing game, and I'm getting in May the Dark Souls one. And so we're seeing a lot of stretch in the 5e system, but I think it's coming with some interesting mechanical changes, because there's an understanding that even with a system that is pretty robust and can be generalized, you need to have specific mechanics to reinforce the style of gameplay. Uh, Rook just said he finished a Meanwhile game last night, which ties into what's going on in the larger world of the primary characters. I mean, Rook, I would argue that you are definitely tapping into the grand campaign. Can we call it grand campaign energy, or is that something that I should not say? I think you're tapping into the grand campaign and into the tenets of it. That So Ben brought up a question. Maybe we'll start here before we jump into our discussion of settings. So Ben, who is a friend of the show, brought up this idea, Josh, that in old school gaming, the focus of the game is actually the world, exploration. When you talk to old school players, they always talked about where they were playing, not who they were playing. Oh, we're playing in Greyhawk, or we're playing in the Forgotten Realms, or we're playing in Tekamu or Glorantha. And so, in some ways, the campaign setting itself was the focus of the campaign, right? You were telling a story in the vast story of the world. Very Malazan, if you will, right? Where do I start the Malazan histories? Well, we're just going to start it here because this is where I want to tell it.
I never got my head around what was actually happening until the very end, because there were so many things.
There's so many things. And then the kind of the new school model is that the character is the focus of the campaign. That really it's the individual personal story, with the intent that the character you start with is the character you're going to end with most of the time. And he's like, where does the grand campaign fall on that spectrum of campaign setting to character story as the focus of the campaign? I had some thoughts, but I wanted to know. I know I'm springing a new question on you here. What are your thoughts on that, both as a GM and maybe as it relates to the grand campaign?
So the question is, how, like, which one does the grand campaign
Yeah,
fall on, or how
yeah.
does it incorporate both?
Or yeah, where on the spectrum would you put that? Do you see it as more as the campaign world focus? Do you see it more as the character focus, a hybrid of the two?
I have. I mean, I would say it certainly leans more towards the world. Most of our
Mm.
discussions before now have they're about the community,
Mm-hmm.
and if I think in our running definition of grand campaign, uh, sticking with one character that you start with and end with is inherently antithetical to kind of our definition here.
And our model, yeah.
Yeah, our model. Um, I think yeah, it's mostly about the world and about a story. It doesn't mean there isn't character.
Right.
Like I oddly, right, like Critical Role does like one character from start to finish
Mm-hmm.
incredibly well.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
But you're also looking at a table of like professional voice actors. They understand, they know story structure, they
Mm-hmm.
write all of this stuff, they live and breathe it. um, Aside from that, some of the best role play that I've seen are people playing uh, bit parts, or right,
Mm-hmm.
well, my character died or retired last session, I'm going to play this one for just a couple of sessions while I make up my. And sometimes, oddly, when everybody at the table buys in, those are right. Those are the ones that occasionally make me like tear up or
Mm-hmm.
laugh till my laugh till my ribs hurt. It's I don't know. So it's not devoid of. It's not like saying that I think the Grand Campaign is more about the world and the overall story and the community means that it's somehow devoid of or in any way lacking
Right.
in character focus. Because I think I don't think this is me personally. I love the world. Any world
Mm-hmm.
I step into, I'm immediately trying to. This is why RuneQuest was so hard for me. Right, I'm trying to gather like I want groups of people. I want
Mm-hmm.
contacts. I want right. I want people that I can talk to and say, I don't have time to do this. Can you take care of this over here and let me know what's
Right.
going on there, etc. And so I'm focused on world and story usually. Um, it, Maybe it's just personal, but I find a lot harder to explore individual character in an improv role playing setting than I do figuring out the world and learning it and
Yeah.
then trying to expand into it.
No, I think that's a good point, and I think I would agree with you. It lies somewhere between the two because you're going to get these intensely like the Odros arc of our RuneQuest game, or the marriage of Sestapos and Harmora, set in the backdrop of the campaign world. And actually, we had several characters that were playing like nieces, nephews, grandchildren. So
Mm.
you end up getting more of the line that you're not just telling Arthur's story. You're
Mm.
telling Uther's story. You're telling Arthur's story. You're telling Mordred's story, and you're seeing. Uh, Sometimes I think you're seeing Gibbon's cycle, right?
Yep.
The strong men create good times create weak men create bad time or create hard times, and then the whole cycle starts kind
Right.
of over again. Um, so yeah, I think it's an interesting discussion and not one that I've seen framed. Typically, when we see game uh, spectrum, whether it's OSR to new school or it's really more talking about gamist, narrativist, simulationist. We don't really talk about the spectrum of what is the focus of the campaign. So I thought it would be interesting
Mm.
to sort of chat about that. All right. So why is system important? Well, from this is where we get super nerdy. From an ontological point of view, the system is the truth of your world, right? It is the platonic ideal of what a game should be. Right? Because we've established that once you put players and die rolls and characters and a GM at the table, rules as written and rules as played are two totally different things. But you can infer things about the world from the game you're playing. If I'm running RuneQuest, you know that cults are important. Limbs are losable and easily reattached depending on who is in the party. And um, the runes are kind of central to the game. When you're playing D&D, you're looking at things like what's super important about D&D. Well, obviously your combat mechanics, your proficiency, and how it relates back to uh, um, your skills and the rest of your character. And then I would argue that like leveling is super important to D&D, right? Your if you're just reading through it the first time, when you read through that first class, barbarian, you're going to see, oh, look at this progression. Like my character is going to get very, very powerful. Um, right? If you're assuming that 1 and 20 are the ends of the scale, that this leveling is going to be important to me. I see my numbers go up. I see these new ability choices that I get to make, and we've talked about level chasing on the podcast before, and I think it's hard, and I don't blame anyone, right? Because, right, what's the first thing you see after the description of the barbarian? You see the big leveling table. And like this is an important piece of the game, and my character is going to get more and more heroic. That's kind of baked into the flavor of the game. So when you're looking at systems and settings, system needs to support the setting. And in a grand campaign, I think the undergirding of a system is super important. What you say about the system brings in a lot of assumptions into the actual gameplay. So, oh, Rook, you and I are going to have a discussion about that. Rook says after his game last night, he's calling horse hockey on levels being important past level 5. Well, that's interesting because there is a new fifth, because there's all, throw a stone, hit a new 5th edition supplement. Um, there is a, man, is it Bracolonia? It is like set in like medieval Italy with all of the like cool like crazy sort of folklore and legends kind of around there. And I don't think they go past level 5. Uh, Rook, I think they keep it to a nice tight 5 or even 10 levels, and so after that, you're just playing your character. Um, So for me personally, and I'll toss it over to Josh. I know Josh has basically been playing 5e, so he is our resident. I'm gonna call it our Han Solo gamer, in the fact that like right when you're watching Star Wars, you don't identify with the moisture farmer who wants to be a space jockey. You identify with Han Solo, right? His car doesn't work. He owes money to people. Like he's just taking jobs. Like he's your everyman character. I will defend. Come at me. That is Han Solo is the
None,
everyman
none
point.
of those things are true of me right now.
No, but I
My
mean
car is functioning. I'm employed.
that's
Don't be worried about me.
that's right. Josh, nope, we are live. I will not say several of the comments that popped into my head because those will
I
live
just I
forever.
just wanted to make sure that the things that you were comparing between me and Han Solo were clear, and the things that you were not comparing are clear.
Josh is like Harrison, like Han Solo, dashingly handsome, an expert pilot. He would shoot first. No, what I mean by that is, right, in a lot of ways, D&D is always the lingua franca of role-playing games. And Josh is running a grand campaign style game in 5e. So he is our sort of point of view character, if you will, on the podcast. For those of you who are coming to the grand campaign going, I run 5e, what is this that you're talking about? So for JM, for me, um, and Josh knows this, I tend to prefer D100 games over D20 games when it comes to grand campaigns. And there's several reasons for this. One, there are no levels in D100 games. It is a much flatter curve of player experience. In RuneQuest and Call of Cthulhu, you only get better at the things you actually attempt to do. And even then, it's not guaranteed. Same with Jackals. In Warhammer Fantasy, you get experience points, but the experience points turn into essentially currency that you are spreading around your character. And this sort of does two things. One, it flattens the curve. It means that when I bring in a new character, I don't have to give them a ton of experience points or or levels to get them integrated into the group. Because in RuneQuest, we did this a bunch of times. You always started with fresh characters, even if your big character died, and it didn't really matter because
And
even
is that what you mean by flatten the curve? Like
yes,
a character who's been playing a while is not significantly different from one who's just starting
exactly.
out. Okay.
You may be slightly better in the fact that you may have 20 or 25 more percentage points in melee than a starting character. But let's be honest, like we saw rune lords like bleed out on the battlefield in RuneQuest because you know what? A brew is still scary. Whether it's session 1 or session 100, like that fumble critical pairing that came up quite a bit in our RuneQuest game.
Mostly the fumble part.
Yes. Um, but also it does lend into like brand new characters can come in, and I don't need Brucephalus is probably the brew that killed that Rune Lord Rook. I'm just saying. Brucephalus is the
There's a the no.
yeah, Rook wants to someday Rook will get to play Brucephalus, the Minotaur like brew.
How many puns is that?
That's like 6.
Because it's Alex, right? It's Alexander the Great's horse.
Yep.
It's Brew.
Hmm.
I
Uh,
thought there was a third, but maybe it's just the two.
I mean, technically Cephalus is head, so
Right.
he is a Minotaur, so
Oh,
he has a bull head. Yeah, like at least 3 puns. It goes at least 3 puns deep. It's possibly one of the best.
it's fantastic.
It is like a katana sword of puns, where it just keeps being folded in on itself and becomes stronger. Um,
Hmm.
Now, so what games do I think work well? At least from my definition of it's got, so in my mind, a good campaign or a good system for a um, grand campaign is going to have 3 things. It's going to have a pretty flattened power curve in the fact that eventually, starting characters aren't outpaced by existing characters. It's going to have a robust option of downtime actions, right? What does your character do when they're not actually out adventuring? Because that's important to establish the idea of community and to establish the idea that time is passing. If you get to go on an adventure and then you are forced to take a downtime action where time passes, time's passing both in game and out of game. I think Ben covers this in his questing beast video, but under the original rules, and it's a parenthetical statement, so nobody is even Ben's like, I don't know how much this was stuck to, but between adventures was the time it was between adventures. If the group takes 3 weeks off, then when the group comes back, their characters have been sitting in downtime for 3 weeks. And so it encouraged players who wanted to get things done to come back to the table. It kept players hungry for that, not going back into that dungeon to make sure another group didn't find it, or we can't wait 3 weeks because the orc invasion is coming, and if we're sitting around for 3 weeks resting. So good downtime actions, flat power curve, and then I think there has to be other reasons that you get removed from the game besides death. This is a weird thing to say, but there have to be reasons for retirement. It's not just death, right? RuneQuest has severed limbs, or the fact that when you get high enough in a temple, do you know what you do? You stop adventuring because you are running a temple. Um, uh, Warhammer Fantasy has uh, limb removal, but it also has corruption. It also has resolve. Like when eventually these things break and your character can no longer go out into the world or is removed from play. Same with jackals, right? If it sounds a lot like jackals, it's because I wrote jackals specifically to play grand campaigns in. So it has seasonal actions. It has broken down time uh, for tracking of records. You get to go on 2 adventures and then a seasonal action. That's a whole half a year of play, and it's got corruption. When your corruption gets high enough, you get removed from the game. Uh, we need to talk at some point, Josh, about the Lukaraji, my Greek-inspired werewolves for jackals that I just finished putting together.
Oh, you pulling on Herodotus?
I am, and we'll talk. Like that's a separate.
Sorry,
No, no,
you said we will talk, and I
no.
immediately
You wanted to do it. Yeah, no. The other game that I think does really well with this is actually old school D&D. And I don't even mean second edition, which I love. I think first edition and basic does a great job at this because you have like you don't get hit dice after level 9, and there are rules for strongholds. And there are rules for taking those strongholds to war. So that's flat power curve, ways to get taken out of the game, and it's because you have save versus death on every level, and then you have downtime actions. What is going to drive the characters to invest in the community? So those are my kind of top choices. So I would say RuneQuest, Warhammer, Jackals, and then BX D&D. Josh, how have you seen 5e shine for your style of game, and then what are some of the things that you've kind of had to shore up, if you will, or what supplements have you used? I know you love Matt Colville's Kingdoms of and Warfare and Stronghold and Follower rules.
I'm much better at picking out things I dislike and things that are problematic than I am at finding the things that are actually beneficial, because I focus on the ones that are not, because I'm trying to fix those. So this I might come across as overly critical of fifth edition, but it's only because I'm better at the one. It's not because it's a bad system.
Well, and C.S. Lewis in An Exercise in Criticism says you really can only criticize something you love, because if you love it, you have spent enough time with it to actually develop a well-rounded view. And I know for you, fifth edition is your game. So all of those caveats in place.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, acknowledging that it's a role-playing system, right? There's rules as written, and then as you said, there's rules as played, and you can take any of these systems and turn them into, I don't know, you could adapt them to anything. So acknowledging that, the breaking point for me was when I sat down and tried to figure out, okay, great, how do I make sure that a player coming into my world and sitting at my table who knows fifth edition, how do I avoid culture shock for that person as much as possible? And when I said, by the time I got to about 100 pages, I realized this is too much. Nobody, right? Nobody is going to read 100 pages just to play at the table. I would love to have you in my campaign, JM.
I might need to see if my Friday nights will free up, or at least for a short arc. I think I would love to
Oh,
do
that'd
that.
be a ton of
I've got
fun.
my wizard idea all set up.
um, so yeah, like and now it's at 120 or 130 pages or so, and it's just too much. I've essentially rewritten the player's handbook so that now when I need to look up a rule, I am actually grabbing the thing that I have written and not the player's handbook. So, and it was a ton of fun, and I loved the whole process. And it was, I mean, I would not have done that if it was not fun and interesting. And it got me, as I started to learn how to I was using home brewery to actually make your pages look like they come out of, and that was just, it was delightful. But it was the number of things that I had to change, and it's how races work. It's how well, it's adding in culture, because I was looking at my world and I go, you're telling me there's no difference between somebody who comes from this city 2,000 miles away that has had only a little bit of contact with this other one. There's no difference between the people who come from those two places. And some of those are minor. Some of those are minor things, right? Being a tiefling does not mean you speak infernal. Like that's nonsense. being from this culture
Yes.
that borders the demon lands. Oh, okay, right. Some of them are pretty simple fixes, but I found that when people were creating new characters, I had to sit down, and it was a 2 hour process, and I needed something that I could just hand them when they had time, they could work through uh, and work through that and do that on their own. So, but it's I think leveling is the main problem. So you've mentioned capping hit points.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's great. And I might just do that in my
Yeah, I
fifth
think I
edition.
think there's something to be said for, right, first and second, you only got hit dice to level 9, and
Mhm.
then you either got a flat 1 above that, or 2 if you were, one of the
Yeah,
martial classes.
yeah. And I've been watching videos on trying to like speed up combat
Mm-hmm.
because it's a key part of it's a key part of right, D&D.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I also have a table of people who most of them mostly like to role play.
Mm-hmm.
Also, in order to get things done in my world, you have to go out into the wilderness, and there's a ton of really deadly combat there. So trying to figure out how
Right.
to speed that up. Um, and one of the simplest suggestions I saw, this is from I think this was Dungeon Craft. It might have been Matt Colville. I don't know. Cut all hit points in half, double the damage. Oh, that's really easy to do,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just look at the stat block, have the HP, double whatever damage you roll, and that's the damage they do. And I go, well, that would certainly make for shorter combat.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, um,
Right, you're
you know,
not
let,
changing their damage output, you're just changing how long it takes to take them out,
yeah,
essentially.
yeah. So I love the curve. I don't know that I ever really was at peace with in RuneQuest just the fact that my my right, we'll take Sestapos, will never be less squishy than he is right now. And right now, a child with a dagger has about a 20% chance of killing him outright.
It's true.
Like, and the first combat we had, I stood on my bison and was just, and I don't know how I convinced the rock lizards not to attack us. I think I just rolled well on a rune or something, but I was just like, no, I don't want to do combat
Yeah.
because I've got like 5 points to stop somebody else from dying, but also like one hit and I'm dead,
Mm-hmm.
which encourages a very fun kind of role play. Like, if your character never gets less squishy, you're going to think real hard about where you go and when and what you're willing to go
Right.
there for. Um, but also, I do like that. I want to be able to really invest in a character that has a chance of dying, but not a chance of one bad roll and you're dead.
Mm.
Right?
Yeah, because we
That,
saw, even when you guys were wildly prepared when you attacked that lunar caravan,
yeah,
it still went
yeah,
south super quick.
yeah. Um, and I love that too because like the whole battle, we're all going, when does the meteor land? Like, when is there's a timer in my head, and I'm like I'm watching how often you check your notes, and I'm going, how when is this thing falling? I don't know.
That's right.
It was amazing, but I like that curve. So, but at the same time, right, leveling as it exists, I think in fifth edition is pretty antithetical to any kind of campaign that you want to run in which the system encourages grand campaign type play.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that I'll acknowledge this one more time and then just stop, right? If the DM and the players are all on the same page and you know exactly what you're going for, everybody has clear expectations, I think you can run a grand campaign in fifth edition. But
Right.
we're talking about the system needs to support the setting, right? This
Mm-hmm.
design of the system encourages types of play. And what fifth edition encourages is past fifth level or so, kick down the door, nuke the room, right? Pick up the pieces. That's an oversimplification, but
Right.
once you get to a certain level, there is no reasonable expectation that you walk into a room and potentially die, other than maybe you're running Tomb of Horrors or something like that, or
Or
one of the
Tugger's
opponents.
Kobolds.
Sure, right? Or one of the opponents has disintegrate, right?
Right.
Like, certainly there are situations that you can set up, but it does not encourage. It doesn't encourage, I think, tactics. It doesn't encourage exploration. I don't know. You can certainly do all of these things, but it does not, by its system, encourage them. And I think leveling is part of the problem. Um, you get to a certain level and you think, well, my character's really powerful, and it's like, great, but the enemy is scaling as well, which means that combat is getting bigger, it's
Mm-hmm.
getting louder, but it's also getting so much longer. Um,
Have you
so
thought about using the escalation die in your game from 13th Age?
I've considered it. It's one of those things that I would forget
Mm.
immediately. I I forget a lot of things in combat, usually because here's the other thing. From the DM side of things, I think I want to run a battle with a lot of things in it. I don't build a dungeon going, well, I've got 5 level this PCs, so each room needs to be roughly this challenge, da 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 da. I build a dungeon where I go, well, this is the ecological like region of my world. What lives here? Great. How do they survive here? Right.
Yeah.
And then I go, great. Kobolds are weak, but they're clever. Fine. There's like 700 of them in this one little place, and it's trapped all to hell. What player group can actually like go in there? I don't know. That was not part of my design questioning. My
Right.
design questioning was, this is how the world works, and everything else is just a challenge to the players. Um,
So, CBS Parker, good to see you. Just jumped into the chat and said, "Have you thought about setting a win condition? Like
yeah,
at
I,
this
I
point?"
see that.
Yeah.
Um, yes, sort of, but that's a really great idea,
Yeah.
and I do not use that as a design question, and I think I should. I think that's a really
Yeah.
good one. What I
It,
what I do some what I do is, I'll take a group of depending on the type of creature, like a group of undead is going to attack until they're destroyed.
right.
But the party was in a deadly encounter a couple sessions ago, and I looked at these creatures, and they were humanoid
Mm-hmm.
ish, and partially sentient. So when only one of the warriors was left, and the hive queen had dipped below half health, um, they ran.
Yeah.
Uh,
I was going to
they
suggest morale rolls, or even, yeah, not
yeah
every fight has to, like, not even every fight has to go to, like, not just to the death, but, we had, I think there was one, I don't know if you were there for that encounter, Josh. I think it was in RuneQuest where bandits came out and were like, give us your weapons and your food, and the PCs fought back and drew first blood, and the bandits had never actually been bloodied in combat, and they were like, oh, this hurts, this sucks, like, we give up, ransom us back to our
yeah
Tula. And yeah. So what's
um,
interesting is, did I send you Matt Finch's primer to old school gaming? I realize, JD, I have to send you a lot of links for this episode.
that
Um,
sounds familiar.
I'll
I,
send
I
it to you
think I
because you're
have
gonna,
it somewhere.
yeah, you're gonna play in our AD&D second edition game here in October. he argues that there are two types of combats in games. There are two approaches, and that basically everything before third edition saw combat as war.
Mhm.
700 kobolds in a cave,
Yeah,
and
we've definitely used that language in conversation
yeah,
before. Right? Combat as war and combat as
sport.
game
Yeah,
sport. That's
as
what it
sport,
was.
right? Yeah,
Yes.
with third edition you had the challenge ratings, and now everything will be balanced, and now it's a game of skill. Whereas
Right.
before, like, I mean, I have adventures from first and second edition, like Caves of Chaos, right? Here is a massive cave filled with goblins. Well, what am I supposed to do with that? I don't know, but if you go running in there,
Yeah.
they're gonna Caesar you on the floor of the Senate. The Senate being their
Yeah.
their sacrificial cave.
Yeah. Like I want a system that by the way it is constructed encourages a player to go, yes, Goblin Cave system, great. Like we've got a familiar, right? Get a rough idea of the tunnel layout. Then we'll collapse that part of Earth over there. We'll collapse it over here, which should isolate these tunnels, and then we'll go in there.
Yeah.
I want a system that encourages that.
Well, I was in Domains of War, which is a supplement for Axe, which is a BX clone. There is a huge section on. There's a huge section on.
Thank you, Rookcat.
I
I guess I need to look that up. I'm in the process of trying to design my own, and I've been trying to read as many as I can get that are similar. I have
Yeah.
not gotten Pathfinder, but I will. Sorry, Jim. Go
No,
ahead.
no, that's fine. I was going to jump in there. Rook is saying to Josh, if you're listening to this on the podcast, that Josh should take a look at Pathfinder One. And I will be honest, Pathfinder One has something like for everything. Josh, do you want intrigue? There's a whole book on intrigue. Do you want mythic overlay templates so that as your character is leveling in class, they're also leveling up this mythic identity that levels separately from them as they embody um, uh, the myth. Uh, they have a handbook for that. The
Oh, that sounds amazing.
their
Because
Pathfinder.
what I'm trying to do, right? Because I want a system that encourages like grand campaigns, but
Yeah,
is rooted specifically in
in Gebercan.
Gebercan. Because adapting other systems to the oddities of my world is fun, but exhausting. Is like I want the curve, but also I want players to be able to right. I also want them to be comparable to a starting character, but
Mm-hmm.
also whatever. And so my plan was right, no levels, but like right as you complete adventures you get
Mm-hmm.
XP or leveling tokens that you can spend at any like trainers that you have acquired over the course of the campaign, so it encourages people to make
Mm-hmm.
contacts, right, things like that, because you can't spend it on learning magic if you don't know anybody who can do magic. So so there's that, right? And then seasonal or downtime actions, right? You would spend those tokens, but then also have a separate leveling system. I was just calling it like your adventuring level.
Mm-hmm.
And once you hit a certain number of prerequisites in like training and contacts and community investment, okay, right, your adventurer level increases, and that maybe increases your
Hit points or your
right, your
survivability.
hit points.
Yeah.
Because I love the idea that yeah, political power is personal power. And so like yes, actually a tyrant warlord who has several cities under his sway should be damn hard to kill.
Yeah.
A tyrant warlord that you've spent the last four adventuring seasons under, whose authority you've spent undermining, whose lieutenants you've been eliminating,
Mm-hmm.
that should reduce his hit points. That should make him easier to kill, and so with the players. Right?
Uh, I think of 7th C second edition. All of their villains had only two stats, and I forget what they are. But one is essentially physical power, and one is essentially uh, influence.
Mm.
And whenever they go to roll something, they take both stats, add them together, and that's how many d10s they get to roll. And they can always roll less than their total if they want to hide their power. But basically,
Right.
in order to take out a villain, to make it eat, like if like heroes are going to roll no more than like 7 to 8 dice, and if villains have 10 in both stats, they're rolling 20 dice. As you undermined their their political authority, their influence score drops. And if you start taking out their lieutenants, you can actually reduce their strength score so that when you go to fight
And
them,
that is a built-in mechanic that
yes,
encourages strategic, like grand scale thinking and tactics. It doesn't reduce it to tyrant king, right? Kill him.
yeah,
Problem solved. No, it's not.
we
No,
should
it isn't.
we should talk, Josh. I would love to sit down with you and just go, okay, what are your goals for the design of the Gebercan system and
I have
see.
a I have a 20 tab Excel file for you.
All right, shoot it on over. Now, I was going to say, so kind of wrapping this up here for fifth edition, the supplements that I think you and I have talked about that have been most helpful in adding the or undergirding 5e for a more grand campaign style game have been the Giphy glyphs material, and we'll post links
Yes.
to those. So, like the monster designer, and then the darker
Yes.
dungeons,
I absolutely use Darker Dungeons.
and then the two Colville books. Is there anything else that, and when we get into, so Richard and I are going to do part two of this later today, and then next month we're going to talk more about what specific mechanics do we feel need to be in place, whether they come with the system or that you want to be keeping your eye toward. That's going to be our episode next month. But what about those four books do you feel like adds to 5e for the grand campaign experience?
I liked that. Well, specifically to the grand campaign. Um, I like strongholds and followers because when a player sees that rules exist for something, it enters their consciousness that, oh, I can try for that.
Mm-hmm.
And right, one of the things that I tell my players in session zero and any new players every time is what you see on your character sheet is not the limit of what you can do. It is a I don't know, a condensation of all of the things that you can certainly do.
Mm-hmm.
It is not at all a limit to what you can do, but still, right, there's that mindset where you look at your character sheet and you have 20 skills and you go, right, none of these are crafting skills.
Right.
This right. So why would I ever attempt to craft, right?
Mm-hmm.
No stronghold rules. Why would I ever try and build a stronghold? Um, I think what fifth edition is still missing is the drive for like building a stronghold in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
I've been using those Colville books for years, and they're amazing. I love them, and I post them for my players, and I say, "Hey, if you ever want to do anything like this, I've got it right here." And it doesn't happen. Nobody goes, "Great, we need a stronghold. It will make all of these things easier. How? Let's make that our goal. How do we get to it?" Whereas like a system. So right, one of the things that I want to build into my Geberken system is cool. In order to advance past this adventurer level, you need a stronghold.
Yeah.
A player sees that, then right from level one, they're going, let's make contacts. We need money to build. Oh, wait,
Mm-hmm.
we just cleared out this place. This would be a good foundation, right?
I
Things
was
like
I was
that.
gonna say, could you introduce a ruin that would be a perfect stronghold, and then give them a tactical reason. Because right, it's always the first time that's the hardest, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's that first time in RuneQuest where somebody finally surrenders and discovers they're not going to get killed because of reputation and weregild. So
Mm-hmm.
I showed you guys that by uh having NPCs surrender because they
Yeah.
knew they could be ransomed. But like, give them a ruin in like a major valley pass, and be like, man, if you guys were to fortify this, This would
Yeah.
defend us against this invasion that you have been hearing. Oh, well, maybe we should look at those rules. Or they go, no, it's not something I want. And then when the hordes come through the
Yeah.
valley, they're like, oh, we could have stopped that, couldn't we have?
Man, it would have been nice to have a fortress directly in their only avenue.
Right. Because I
Yeah.
know you're a huge fan of Wheel of Time, and I'm just thinking, like, why do the Borderlands exist? Because there is a clear need for the Borderlands to
Yeah.
exist. Was it
Uh,
Tawin's Gap? Uh,
Tarwin's Gap.
Tarwin's Gap and the and the fortresses that are there. It's like, well, you know what we need? We need to stop that from ever happening again. So,
Yeah. So yeah, I like that. And somebody mentioned earlier, Rookhead, right?
hmm
Right. Tasha's really opened up, right, on the racial aspect, right, and so languages aren't tied to, sure, right. But all that really did, I think, was tell DMs what I at least already knew, which is I can do anything that I want with, right, the rules that I play with at my table, right? If I think if fifth edition wanted to introduce something that was doing that encouraged grand campaign play, then they would start releasing uh, mechanics tied to worlds. This is the sort of world you're playing in. Great.
hmm
Use these mechanics.
Right.
These are maybe the way to phrase it would be these are the player behaviors you want, right? That you're looking for in this campaign. Great. Here are the mechanics that encourage that play. Use
Yes.
this book for that type of world. Here are you right. You want a slap happy right heist campaign. Da 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 da. Use these mechanics. You want a dark, gritty, death is around every corner. You need to beg, borrow, steal, scrape every advantage you possibly can to survive, and strongholds are good. Use these mechanics.
So
Um,
what you're saying is we need to do a grand campaign source book for fifth edition and
yes,
as iconic. Yeah.
essentially, yes, because there are options. There are so many options.
hmm
I stopped buying the fifth edition source books because there were just too many of them. I don't have that kind of money. Um, the options are just limitless. Now stop giving options and start creating mechanics that by their nature encourage specific styles of play.
Right. Well, we got our first buyer. Rook said he'd throw money at a 5e. Well, guys, that brings this episode of the Grand Campaign to a close. Actually, part one of this episode. Again, later today, if you see the Twitch alert go live, know that Richard and I will be doing the same discussion, just kind of building off what we did here, kind of talking more about this from a D100, or Richard's probably going to talk about the One Ring. That was kind of his Grand Campaign introduction. But yeah, thanks to everyone who's joined us in the chat. Rook, always good to see you. Ben, good to see you. CBS Parker, thanks for joining us on this. We'll be back next month where we talk more about what subsystems make for a good grand campaign. And we've got, I think, 9 or 10 episodes just right now planned. We're going to talk about factions, why those are important. What resources do we have as GMs to share with people who want to run this style of game? What insights? What are some pitfalls that you should know about going into the grand campaign? But again, as we've talked about, it's a lot more forgiving in the fact that if you screw up as a GM, there's always the next generation that you can get it right. And I was going to say the your thing about after fifth level, Josh, the fear of death kind of goes away. It made me think of that moment from Critical Role when Keyleth just jumps off the cliff because
We're practically
we're
gods.
practically gods. Like, what's the worst that could happen? And then gravity kicks in, and they're like, oh,
I
maybe.
really appreciated that Matt either forgot or ignored the rules where fall damage caps out at 20d6. Because other right by the mechanics of fifth edition,
Right.
she's right. She is correct. She should not have died from that.
Again, I'm gonna throw Pathfinder out too, Josh, because I think in Pathfinder 2 they just made it super simple. It's 1 hit point of damage per foot that you fall. Oh, I'm sorry. You fell a
What?
1,000 feet?
What if you
Splorch.
like? Oh God. That might be where you get those memes of like the little kid in the plastic armor who just like looks really sad, and it's like tripped on my way out of the tavern, took 1 point of fall damage, died.
Right. All right. Well, everyone, thank you for joining us. Josh, as always, it's just great to chat with you about gaming and hear about Gebercan. Thank you for sharing the campaign update with us. And we'll be back next month with more Grand Campaign. Again, there will be a second part today. So if you have time this afternoon and want to tune in for more system discussion, if you just need more crunchy system discussion in your life on a Saturday, tune back into the Iconic Production channel. We'll give you about a 10-minute head start so you know that part two is coming. So, as always, thank you to Rook for his immense generosity and to the chat for just engaging with us as we talk about this. We'll be back. I'll be back on Tuesday with more behind the screen. We're actually going to do a campaign clinic talking about running in canon settings when something bad is about to happen. So we're going to talk about the example I used when someone brought this up in the chat was, how do you play, how do you run a game set in episode 3 with players as Jedi when you know Order 66 is coming and everyone knows Order 66 is coming? So we're going to talk a little bit about that on Tuesday. And so until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, stay gaming. I am JM. This is my co host Josh. We will be back with more of the Grand Campaign in a month. Have a good one.